Okay, thanks. I think that we probably should begin because I know that two of our panelists have only exactly an hour before they have to leave. So we probably should get going to make sure that we are able to use all of our time. So welcome everyone to the Asia Pacific Stats Café. We're very pleased to have the session on statistics that leave no one behind on the Inclusive Data Charter. I'll hand over to Gemma, the Director of the Statistics Division, for some opening remarks. But before I do so, just to highlight that we would request that you keep yourselves on mute, please. And if we do hear background noise, we will be muting participants to ensure a smooth flow for the presenters. And we would request that unless you're speaking, please keep your video off as well. When we come to the question and answers, to help manage the session, we would ask that you please type your questions into the chat box, and we'll come to those questions through that function. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma van Houderen, the Director of the Statistics Division, for some opening remarks. Gemma, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Petra, and a very warm welcome to 2021 and the Asia Pacific Stats Café. It's a real pleasure to say hello for the first time for 2021. And it's a real pleasure to continue our cafe series into 2021. It's been very successful throughout 2020, and we're looking forward as ESCAP Statistics Division to continue bringing you topics and cafes on issues that are extremely relevant to our region and to you. I'm therefore really pleased that today's cafe, and we're kicking off the year 2021 with a really important topic of leave no one behind. So I'm really quite pleased that this topic has been chosen as the first one for 2021. It's a really important reminder of the importance of the 2030 agenda. We're now in the second trimester of the 2030 agenda, and it's decade of action that was launched in 2019. We still have a lot of data opportunities as well as data challenges to meet the 2030 agenda, and in particular the leave no one behind ambition of that agenda. So I won't spend a lot of time introducing, just to again welcome you to 2021. So I'm really pleased that we're kicking off this cafe series this year with this important topic of leave no one behind, and bringing to you some speakers and presentations on activities that have been undertaken through the Inclusive Data Charter globally and regionally, and bringing to you a very special guest speaker from Kenya to share with you an experience from our African colleagues. So back to you. Thanks very much, Petra.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. So our first speaker today is Kate Richards. She's an outreach manager for the Inclusive Data Charter at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So Kate, I invite you to take the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Petra and Gemma, and thank you for hosting this conversation. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully, and you should all be able to see the presentation's working okay? Great.
It is, Kate, but we can see it in presenter mode.
Oh, sorry, here we go. There we go, that should be better.
That's it, yes, yeah.
Perfect, great. So as I said, I'm Kate Richards from the Inclusive Data Charter. It's an initiative hosted by the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And I wanted to start off just reiterating that across the world, we still lack meaningful and accurate data on marginalized people. And when those are furthest behind, go uncounted, they are invisible to decision makers. We know that marginalized people are the most likely to be unregistered by civil registration systems, uncounted in censuses, and unreached by data collection efforts. And when we look only at averages, we inadvertently overlook the needs of marginalized people. Limited data disaggregation really exacerbates the vulnerability of many marginalized groups by masking the extent of deprivation and disparities. To make visible marginalized people and improve their situation, it's really clear that we need inclusive and disaggregated data. And with the launch of the SDGs in 2015, this was really reiterated. The Sustainable Development Goals signaled a fundamental shift to how statistics and data are generated and used. And the Leave No One Behind commitment especially really requires everyone and everywhere to be counted and monitored. The Sustainable Development Goals explicitly call for data to be disaggregated by multiple dimensions to identify, address, and monitor the needs of those furthest behind, and to really tackle the growing inequalities. And while we've seen some progress on establishing guidance and frameworks for disaggregation, the IEAG working group on disaggregation has made a lot of progress, and there'll be a handbook coming out at the upcoming Statistical Commission on Disaggregation. We know that this is still a significant challenge for many governments, from higher costs of data collection on those hard to reach groups, to technical complexities, and also the increased need for transparency and confidentiality as data is disaggregated and we're working with sometimes more marginalized and vulnerable groups. It's often the case that good practices and the new approaches to disaggregation that are being pioneered by member states, by national statistical offices, by civil society and multilaterals aren't always shared across those sectors and across those institutions. And it was really with that idea in mind that the Inclusive Data Charter was launched and developed to really increase knowledge sharing, collaboration, as well as prioritization of inclusive data. So the Inclusive Data Charter is an initiative that was actually co-developed with governments, multilaterals, and civil society. And the global partnership kind of was receptive to those institutions really coming together with the recognition that we need increased awareness and collaboration on inclusive data to enable us to be in a position to really drive progress on the Leave No One Behind commitment and achieve the SDGs by 2030. Obviously, with 10 years to go, there's a lot of learnings that already happened, but still a long way to go. So launched in 2018, the IDC advocates for more inclusive data. We support governments and organizations to take action and to prioritize this issue. And we facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing across geographies, across institutions, and across sectors. The IDC is an open and growing network, and it enables institutions to set their own inclusive data priorities, while also kind of creating this broader movement for inclusive data and a movement of support. So I wanted to touch upon the 5 inclusive data principles that were kind of the foundation for the IDC. And again, these were co-developed with our founding champions and others, and are what all of the organizations within the IDC have committed to progressing. I think these are also much more broadly applicable to organizations or institutions starting to think about building more inclusive data systems. So firstly, we need to acknowledge that all people need to be visible in the data to really understand their lives. And we also need to include those everyone, and especially marginalized groups, in the development of statistical processes so that they can kind of shape and inform those processes. Secondly, that all data should, wherever possible, be disaggregated in order to accurately design or describe all populations. Thirdly, that we really see the importance of making that high quality, timely data from both official and non-official sources accessible. and that we should be using new data sources when appropriate. Fourthly, that those responsible for data production need to be accountable and really think about how we balance the principles of transparency, confidentiality, and privacy to ensure that no one is put at risk of identification or discrimination. And lastly, that collecting and analyzing disaggregated data requires a specific skill set, and often these skills and capacity need to be built up in institutions, and that work really needs to be complemented by adequate and sustainable financing. As I said, that these principles really, for us, form the foundation for taking a more inclusive approach to data and statistics, and many of our champions have focused in on specific aspects of these principles to strengthen, as well as others that have taken maybe a more holistic approach to embedding these principles within their work. So since launching, the IDC has actually doubled in size. We convene very diverse organisations and governments with different priorities and different sectoral and technical expertise, again, to really facilitate that broad knowledge exchange and to build their capacity. The network continues to be open, so all governments and organisations interested to advance their inclusive data goals are able to join. And we are keen to collaborate further with institutions in the Asia Pacific region. You'll see that the Philippines were a very early participant in the process and were one of our founding champions. And many of our champions do work in the region, but we're looking forward to working further. So I thought it would be useful just to quickly touch upon the ways that what's involved with being an IDC champion and the way that the IDC supports institutions to advance inclusive data. So firstly, we encourage, obviously, institutions to commit to the 5 principles that I've just talked about and sign up to the Charter. And this signifies that institution as a global champion of inclusive data. Building on that commitment, we then help to foster multi-stakeholder dialogue on inclusive data priorities in the specific context that that institution works in. So often that means convening dialogues between statisticians and policymakers on what the pressing data gaps are, and often engaging with civil society and those community representatives to shape that dialogue too. We support institutions to narrow in on some of the key inclusive data priorities they have, and often those priorities are ones that are really critical to achieving existing plans, such as national development plans, organizational strategies. And then based upon these defined priorities, we support institutions to develop an action plan that outlines the concrete goals, activities, and timelines that will enable them to make progress on these priorities. And the aim is really to integrate this action plan with existing work streams and for it to be a document that is really useful to give clarity and internal consensus on the topic, and enables us to externally use it to foster more collaboration. So we support the implementation against these action plans, and again, focusing especially on fostering collaborations to build the capacity or enhance approaches, and unlocking additional resources to fulfill the plans. And then we work a lot on really amplifying the learnings that come out of this journey for institutions, amplifying the best practices globally to drive forward other approaches, and also communicating the impact of this to other stakeholders in the data ecosystem, as well as national stakeholders. So in addition to the presentations from my colleagues today, I just wanted to highlight quickly some ways specific champions have progressed their inclusive data work through the IDC. As I mentioned, the Philippine Statistical Authority are a founding champion, and they really joined to strengthen their work on disaggregating SDG indicators. And I see some of our colleagues from PSA on the line, so hopefully I am doing a good job at summarising their action plan and the progress they've made. Their progress has definitely been very impressive, and so they've increased disaggregation on many SDG indicators, as well as explored using new data sources such as citizen-generated data to fill data gaps and satellite imagery to advance poverty statistics. And they've kind of explained the IDC has helped them to really increase awareness on inclusive data. Obviously, they have built up their capacity on data to fulfill the action plan over the past 2 years. And they've also participated in knowledge exchange and strengthened that opportunity to learn, especially from other governments. Colombia's National Statistical Institute are also founding IDC champions. And they joined the IDC to really advance a more holistic approach to inclusive data. They wanted to build on their existing work on gender statistics, but broaden that out. So through their work with the IDC, they've developed a new set of guidelines to mainstream disaggregation by age, sex, disability status, and geography across the entire statistical system. And it's one of the first times I think we've seen that type of approach, and especially kind of the reach of those kind of intersectional approach to disaggregation. And they use the IDC principles kind of throughout the project to inform their approach. And we've worked really closely with the team there to review and launch those guidelines. And we've worked quite closely to, continue to help them to be motivated and incentivize their work on inclusive data. And that's something our colleagues have appreciated. We've worked with them to kind of foster broader engagement and action and increase their capacity and knowledge sharing on these topics. So I think that's where I can end, and I'm very much looking forward to the other participants' presentations and look forward to any questions. Thank you very much for your time. And as I said, we're interested to hear from institutions that are progressing inclusive data in the region and who are interested to maybe learn more about the IDC or interested to connect with some of our champions. Thank you, Petra.
Thank you very much, Kate, for such an interesting presentation. I'd like to hand over now to Sara Duerto Valero, who is a regional advisor for gender statistics for UN Women.
Thank you so much, Petra. Let me share my screen. Okay. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, but it's not full screen. Now it is. Oh. It's fine. Yeah, no, it's fine.
It's
now.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much, Petra and ESCAP colleagues, for inviting me here to join you. I'm very delighted that we're talking about this topic, so it's exciting. I will talk, I'll follow on Kate's presentation and talk a little bit about mainstreaming gender across different areas of statistical work here in the region in Asia and the Pacific to meet this promise of leaving no one behind. So, I think in UNWomen, obviously, we take the leave no one behind approach from a gender angle, right? And, lucky for us, one of the 17 SDG goals is goal 5 on gender equality. But a lot of people tend to think that, if we achieve the goal 5 targets, then we can tick the box on gender equality, which is not really the case because gender actually matters for each of the SDG goals. Like if you take goal 1, eliminating poverty, but you don't eliminate poverty for women, then 50% of the world's population remains poor, right? So you're leaving 50% behind. And not just women versus men, but also what is happening to rural women or what is happening to rural women that live in a certain province or of a certain ethnicity, right? So you can actually, drill down and start combining different characteristics to see if all the groups are actually achieving all of the goals. So from a statistical perspective, since many of us in this conversation today are statisticians, right? What does it really mean to leave no one behind? So from a gender perspective, obviously, it means that we need to sex disaggregate our data to the extent possible across all of the SDG goals, not just goal 5, right? So that means if we're looking at poverty rates, we actually look at poverty rates disaggregated by sex to see if there are differences between men and women, and we know there are. In addition, besides disaggregating the data, we need to look also at other forms of gender statistics. So for instance, issues that pertain to women or to men uniquely that sex disaggregated data would not capture, right? So for instance, think about reproductive health, right? So the proportion of births that are attended by a skilled professional is not sex disaggregated for obvious reasons, but it's still a gender issue, right? And similarly, when we look, for instance, at disaster data, right? So some of the obvious information that's collected after disasters is, number of deaths, injuries, etc. And then we look at number of people whose homes have been destroyed, for instance. We rarely look at things such as the proportion of households whose water source was compromised after a disaster. And when we actually have this data, we see that that women are affected disproportionately because they are often in charge of water collection. So these are some of the examples of gender indicators that we need to look at beyond sex disaggregation if we really want to achieve the SDGs from a leave no one behind perspective. And then, of course, what I was mentioning earlier, and what Kate also mentioned earlier, is the need to disaggregate at multiple levels simultaneously, right? So not just comparing men with women, but also comparing women with rural women and with rural poorest women to see really what's happening there. So when we look at the set of SDGs, as I said, gender is relevant for all SDGs, but there aren't gender indicators in all SDG goals, right? So the importance of really taking some of the existing indicators and disaggregating them, it's really quite high. So for instance, when we look at the proportion of people living in slums, we disaggregate the data by sex, and we see that actually there are differences depending on the country, right? So it's important that we go that one step further and disaggregate the data not just by sex, but by different characteristics. And again, when we look at the SDG framework, we have gender goals kind of like sprinkled around the social dimensions of the framework and even the economic dimensions to an extent, but they're rarely present in the environmental dimensions of the framework. So looking at sex disaggregation and addition of indicators from a gender angle for the environment goals is particularly important. Now, what happens when we disaggregate by more than just sex, right? So if this is the case of Pakistan. So here we're looking at many different SDG indicators, as you can see around the circle, and we're disaggregating by wealth quintile, by urban rural, and by region, right? So what we see is that obviously there are certain groups of population that are better off than all the other groups for any given indicator. So in this case, we see obviously that the richest urban Urdu and the richest urban Punjabi women, this is an analysis only of women, are much better off than the poorest rural Saraiki women, for instance, right? So the same applies for almost every indicator that we look at, and definitely for every country. Obviously, the locations, ethnicities vary per country, but it's the same message. So anyway, this is just to show you the importance of really disaggregating the data, because otherwise we aren't really seeing all these groups that are lagging behind if we look only at the national aggregates. But how do we overcome some of these challenges to really meet this leave no one behind promise and to produce all this data and to make sure all this data is used? So first, so in UN Women, we kind of work through this Women Count program where we work on gender data. We work on a 3-track approach. So first, we help countries build an enabling environment to produce this data. Then we help countries produce the data. And then finally, we help different policymakers and advocates use the data. So in the first kind of like track about building an enabling environment, some of the activities that we support include integrating and multi-level disaggregation analysis in some of the national strategies for development of statistics, as well as regional strategies such as the Pacific Roadmap. And I have included some links here on the PowerPoint for all of you to kind of like play around later. In addition, we build capacity in countries to actually produce these multi-level disaggregated statistics and use them. And we leverage partnerships to the extent possible for gender mainstreaming across many different areas. So for instance, I'm sure most of you know that the Committee on Statistics in this last session decided to mainstream gender across different areas of statistics, right? So we are working very closely with colleagues in ESCAP to make sure gender is integrated in certain work streams, such as, for instance, disaster statistics, CRVS. We organize joint training on gender statistics, etc. So really, we try to integrate it across all different work streams. And we have done quite a bit of work as well with ESCAP and other organizations on gender and environment statistics, putting together a set of indicators and a model questionnaire for countries that want to collect this data. So that's the enabling environment, right? Then step 2 is really, okay, now that we have kind of like the guidance and the skills, let's actually start collecting the data. So for that, obviously, we support some specialized surveys on topics such as time use or gender and environment, or modules on land ownership together with our FAO colleagues. But we also help countries quite a bit with data reprocessing, and a lot of this work on Leave No One Behind is really about reprocessing some of the data that we all already have. So we have created some guidelines and as well as training materials on disaggregating data at multiple levels. And we have included this topic also in our training curriculum on gender statistics that we have put together with CEAP colleagues. And we're working with the ESCAP colleagues as well on turning some of this in online e-learning modules for everybody to benefit from this. In addition, we provide hands-on technical support to countries that are interested on conducting some of this multi-level disaggregation analysis. And we have some countries, such as Mongolia, which I see colleagues from Mongolia are online, that have already actually produced some estimates disaggregated at multiple levels, which will be updated onto their database very soon. So this is part of the work that we do. And then in addition to that, obviously with COVID-19, there were clear signs that the effects of the pandemic were a little, different between women and men. So we started collecting data in many different forms. We did some rapid assessment surveys. We have done big data analysis on online searches for violence against women support services. We have also done some survey and big data hybrid analysis on digitalization and how this is helping micro businesses survive, as well as some data integration analysis on gender and climate change. And finally, the third track, make sure the data gets used, right? What's the point otherwise? So we support countries to really report some of this data, and many countries actually have this data and disaggregate the data, but then this data is not reported either on their websites or to the international statistical system. So for many of us, we just don't know, right? In addition, we also train actual, data users, like in ministries, in civil society, in academia, to generate some of this data, to analyze data that's already available, as well as to interpret the data and to use it for decision making. And we also work with university students to make sure that they can also use this data and analyze it and use it, in the future in the profession. So I think that's all. If any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them later. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I'd like to now invite Renice from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics to present on their excellent work on taking forward the Inclusive Data Charter.
Thank you very much. Morning, afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen in a short while. I hope we are all able to see it. Is it visible?
Yes, I can see it fine.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to present on KNBS work on Inclusive Data Charter in collaboration with the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection. And as you've been told, I'm from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. I work under Governance, Peace and Security Statistics section. So as a national statistics organization in Kenya, we are a semi-autonomous government agency mandated through an act of the parliament to collect, analyze, collate, and disseminate official statistics We are also mandated to plan, authorize, coordinate, and supervise all official statistical programs undertaken within the national statistical system. Our major sources of data, we have the census, surveys, and administrative data. As an NSO, we usually ensure that we have data disaggregated by sex, age, among other variables. But during this presentation, I'll focus on disability statistics, inclusion in ensuring that persons with disability are included in our data processing or data records. So I'll take you through what KNBS is doing to ensure inclusive data for persons with disability. First and foremost, we had our last census in 2019, Kenya Population and Housing Census. And during that census, we had a module, disability module, where we used the Washington Group on Disability Statistics short set of questions. And we also had some additional questions on albinism and whether the disability condition is affecting performance of the individuals in economic activities. So we ensured that we had that module, and we had already released some results, which includes indicators on disability prevalence by sex, place of residence, and counties. And preparation for producing or production of the disability monograph is ongoing. So with regards to the ongoing process of producing the 2019 Kenya Population and Housing Census Disability Monograph, we are looking at certain thematic areas or disaggregate the indicators that we are going to disaggregate by sex. We are also going to disaggregate most of our variables by disability status or type and age. We also have place of residence where we have rural and or urban, and we also have our counties. Then the other disaggregating variables that we are considering are level of severities. By severities, we mean mild, more moderate, and severe, yeah. And we also have number of disabilities. An individual may have one or more than one disability. We also have education attainment, attendance, employment status, marital status, orphanhood, among other variables, including household and housing condition variables or indicators. Then apart from the census, KNBS also launched a disability technical working group or committee. We did this in September. We realized that there is need to have a collaboration with our stakeholders, both from state and non-state actors. And this committee comprises of both data users and producers drawn from various sections. In this committee, we also have the disabled persons organizations. We realize that they are key because at times we may produce certain indicators which maybe have inquiries, but if at all we don't involve them from the initial stages, then we may have problems. So having brought them on board, we believe that we'll have good discussions and validations. So the committee is charged with ensuring that disability data is collected, collated, compiled, analyzed, and disseminated. And the main objective of forming this committee or the group was to establish a coordinated production and dissemination of disability statistics in supporting policy and program implementation, and also for monitoring and evaluating all the processes of producing data on persons with disability, and also in promoting best practices where you involve both data users and data producers. Another activity is through the technical working group, KNBS is planning to collect more administrative data on disability or persons with disability from various stakeholders or data producers. The data will be published annually in our economic survey publication or statistical abstract, though we've been reporting on cash transfers received by various marginalized groups in the annual report. So we believe that we still have more data that we can collect. So through the technical working group, we believe we'll have more indicators to ensure inclusivity. Then the Bureau is also planning to include Washington group on disability enhanced short set of questions. I believe we are all aware of that. And we believe that in all the upcoming surveys, like we want to advocate that in the upcoming Kenya Demographic and Health Survey, we have at least a module with this so that we can disaggregate other variables by disability status. We are also planning to ensure that it is included in the continuous household survey program. This one is a survey that is meant to give poverty indicators, yes, at various levels. So we believe that once we have a module in that, then we'll be able to ensure disaggregation by disability status. Then in terms of collaboration between KNBS and the ministry, KNBS is currently providing technical support to the ministry together with all the relevant data or information that they require from us, from our publications and from various surveys, censuses, yes, so that they can plan to improve on inclusion of persons with disability. Then with the assistance of the ministry, together with the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, that is an organization that is in charge of all the DPOs, we have brought on board all the DPOs, as I had told you initially. So the ministry really assisted us in this to ensure that they give us their input in all the stages of disability data production. So we really appreciate their efforts on that. And there is a plan to validate the results that we are going to receive or that we are going to produce from the last census. And we have the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection as one of our key stakeholders who must give their input to ensure that whatever we are going to publish is as per the requirements, or to ensure that they are relevant to our users. So we are really going to involve them. Once we are through with the draft, we'll have some validation together with the entire technical working committee. And KNBS, in conjunction with the ministry, are planning to conduct a comprehensive national disability survey. We did the last one in 2007 and it's long overdue. So we are looking for funds to ensure that we do it as soon as possible. So the ministry will really play a key role in this because we believe that the census data is not comprehensive, so we must complement it with a national survey. So we'll have that done. And as I conclude, we appreciate the opportunity you gave us to participate in this meeting and for the continuous support given to us through the Inclusive Data Charter. And we are looking forward to continuing engagement as we improve our services to persons with disabilities. And as a national statistical organization, we are always ready to adopt or implement any good practice. So in case you people have got anything that you feel we can include, we welcome capacity building to our staffs. And we believe that we'll make a step in Africa and even globally. Otherwise, thank you, and I welcome questions after this.
Thank you so much, Renice, for that illustrative example from Kenya. I think there's a lot that we can learn from how this work has moved ahead in Kenya. It's really a very good example of best practice. I'd like to now move to Gemma, who will provide some some input from the ESCAP Statistics Division perspective on the Inclusive Data Charter and how it aligns with our regional commitments.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Petra. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be following the three presentations here today. And thank you, Renice and Kate and Sarah, for three wonderful presentations. Hold on, I'm not sure why. So I'm just going to very briefly now share with you some perspectives on the priorities for leaving no one behind in the Asia Pacific region. And I'm going to very much draw on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and I'm going to draw on two principles that are in the agenda, which I think is worthwhile us coming back to every so often. The first principle is, from a leave no one behind point of view, our governments, when they signed the 2030 Agenda back in 2015, encouraged us to enhance the capacity building support for developing countries, including the strengthening of national data systems and evaluation programs, particularly in the countries that I've listed there with the 5 dot points. African countries, as we've just heard from Renice, in Kenya, but also least developed countries, of which there's 12 in our region, small island developing states, of which there are 22 in our region, 5 of which are also classified as least developed, in landlocked developing countries, of which there is 12 in our region, 4 of all so are least developed, as well as middle income countries, of which there's 21 in our region. So ESCAP and a lot of the development partners globally and regionally very much focus on least developed countries, these 5 country groupings: African countries, least developed, small island developing states, landlocked developing countries, and middle income countries, in ensuring that we support you in capacity building, particularly around national data systems. So that, to me, is an important aspect of leaving no country or behind. Regionally, we have many agreements, many regional development agreements, one of which is called the Collective Vision and Framework for Action, or its longer title is called Advancing Official Statistics for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a collective vision and framework for action by the Asia Pacific Statistical Community. And this was endorsed back in 2016 at the ESCAP Committee on Statistics. And it's got 5 areas of action. And I'm going to use these 5 areas to share with you some of the activities and supports that are available here in Asia Pacific. And I'll read them out as I go through them, but I'm going to be referring to these 5 agreed action areas. The first action area I wanted to speak to was, again, the 2030 Agenda as a global development agreement. And this, to me, is very consistent with our agreed regional priority of integrated statistics for integrated analysis. And why I see the link between the 2030 Agenda and this action area is, again, because the 2030 Agenda specifies the inclusive groups, or the leave no one behind priorities, for disaggregated data. And these are listed here as income, sex, age, race, ethnicity, migrant status, disability, geographic location, and any other characteristics that are important to national context. So as we've just heard from Sarah, UN Women lead a lot of work actually around gender and sex. And then we've just heard a great presentation from Renice on the disaggregation area there of disability. But we all equally also need to keep in mind these other disaggregation areas: income, age, race, ethnicity, migrant status, as well as geographic location, and anything else that's relevant to you in your national context. The second action area of the regional agreement, a second area is action area A, which is called engaging users and investing in statistics. And here, similar to data for SDGs and Kate with the Inclusive Data Charter, ESCAP's also put a lot of emphasis on user-producer dialogues to ensure that the supply of data and the production of official statistics is in policy relevant areas. And this diagram here on the left-hand side, too often we see this issue of the sort of a bit of a vicious cycle, if you like. We've got a lack of data, therefore we've got a lack of evidence, which then means we've, lack of policies or evidence to inform those policies, which then cycles through to a lack of demand for data, and the cycle just goes round and round. And just bringing us back to Renice, the presentation from Kenya National Stats Office, you saw there how important it was that the National Stats Office worked with the Disability Ministry to make sure that the disaggregations, the questions, and the analysis and the publication was relevant to the policy ministries in Kenya. So I'll just dismiss this. So this, we here in Asia Pacific have a lot of work around a tool that's developed called EPIC, Every Policy is Connected, and it's about using this tool to foster a dialogue between the users of data, like women's machineries, disability ministries, and so on, with the data providers, particularly the National Statistics Office. And this tool is really provides lots of opportunities for addressing the Leave No One Behind ambitions of the 2030 Agenda. I've listed all 8 of them from the actual manifesto, but you'll also see that I think it's also relevant to some characteristics of national circumstances. And we saw in our work with both with the Samoan National Stats Office, the importance of a disaggregation between the formal and informal sector in their situation. The third area which I wanted to speak to you about was action area B, which was assuring quality and instilling trust in statistics. And here we've really done a lot of work over the last 12 months, 2 years, on the area of data integration. And I'd particularly like to say hello to everyone on the cafe here today who are also a part of our data integration community of practice. This community of practice has been very active over the last 6 to 9 months. They meet weekly or fortnightly to share information and knowledge and best practices in the area of data integration. And this community of practice, or this group of people, all share a concern or a passion, in this case a passion for data integration, and they're learning how to do this. And here we've really seen some great examples being shared of the power of data integration as a methodology for addressing many of the disaggregation data needs, income, sex and gender, age. I've seen them on the left-hand side there. But also we've seen it being considered for employed and unemployed, formal, informal sector. And the real value here of data integration, in particular when we're running our population censuses, is you can bring a lot of the demographic variables like age, household characteristics, income, and so on, with other data sets to improve your data availability. The fourth area of the action plan for our region is modernising statistical business processes. And here I'd like to also echo Kate's point about and Sarah's point about we need to think creatively about how do we use all data that's available to us. We don't need, in this day and age, we don't need to always be looking to run new data collections. We can use existing data, including big data, administrative data, to meet some of our data disaggregation priorities. In our region, I have seen the use of big data to produce disaggregated statistics with migration status or with geographic location. But I've also seen some interest in using big data to get disaggregations for tourist and non-tourist groups, as well as for temporary workers. And here in particular, the use of mobile phone data and satellite data are two opportunities that can help in combination with other data sets and the technology around data integration to meet data disaggregation needs. Finally, action area 5 is about having requisite skill sets. And here our Statistical Institute for Asia and the Pacific has partnered with many of you, with UN Women, with CoStat, with Stats Malaysia, with Government Japan, to bring a lot of training available for data disaggregation, the use of big data, particularly focused on those Leave No One Behind groups, countries in our region. So to conclude, Leave No One Behind is central to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and disaggregated provides the evidence for those ambitions. But disaggregated data can be delivered in many different ways. It can be delivered by integrating data into nationally relevant policies, by using technologies like data integration, and by using non-traditional data sources. The tools, the technology, and the supports are all available, and I just encourage you as we start 2021, please innovate, please be creative, and we are very happy to help you build your capacity and strengthen your statistical system in this area. Thank you very much. Back to you. Thanks, Petra.
Thank you so much, Gemma. I'm afraid that we have gone a bit over time, and I hope, though, that you'd agree that these presentations were all really useful and interesting. So I hope that you will be, that we will actually have some time now for questions and answers. I can see that we have one question in the chat already from Yuko Kitada. And it's for Kate or Sarah. It said, does the IDC initiatives and or UN Women have a list of possible vulnerable population groups so that different countries can take a look and think whether these groups' categories apply to their own national contexts? It may help them inspire and further identify marginal groups that are not yet counted in statistics. So Kate or Sarah, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, and then I'm sure Sarah might have additional points. I'll try and be brief because I know time's running out. We don't have a list of this exactly. One of the projects we're doing this year is working on some guidance and documents around intersectionality and thinking about how really the vulnerable groups of people are often, face marginalization on a number of different fronts. And so we really need to think about how we disaggregate data by multiple dimensions to identify those. And so I think that work will definitely get towards thinking about what are some of those groups that are cross-cutting across different contexts. So definitely we can share that with you as that emerges. Yeah, I'm not sure if Sarah has other insights there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, a bit of a similar answer. We don't have a specific list, although there are some obvious, categories that I think we all work with. We have done quite a bit of work in many countries disaggregating the data by wealth, sex, obviously, location, ethnicity, and urban-rural. And we see that these are the variables that tend to matter all over the place. Like, it's the same variables that tend to matter all over the place, right? And then you can throw age, right? Like, for certain indicators, age matters a lot. For certain indicators, migration matters a lot, but I think that there's like a core set of variables that tend to matter for pretty much every country, you know, developed and developing. So I think, and so that's one thing, you know, there's this, you know, this set of variables that you should always consider. But also, and I wanted to maybe ask Gemma to talk about this a little bit, because our colleagues at ESCAP have this EPIC tool that precisely looks into policy to look at what are some of these disadvantaged groups in order to you know, identify these disadvantaged groups from the national policies. So I think that's also another maybe good piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just jump in there, Petra. So to me, I also haven't seen a list of marginalised groups or disadvantaged groups or vulnerable group, whatever you want to call them. I like to go back to the 2030 agenda, and that lists those 8 specific groups that our governments agreed to back, you know, in 2015, which include income, race, ethnicity, and so on. And then it says, and other characteristics that are of national relevance. And here, through our work on EPIC, we've seen this, and our work around using big data, we have seen this importance of informal versus formal sector, so different worker types, formal sector versus informal sector, as well as tourist and non-tourist. So I don't know whether I want to call them marginalised or vulnerable groups, but the making sure that what's relevant to your national circumstance can also mean, you know, groupings that are particularly important to various policies. Like, we have so many economies in our region that are tourism dependent, and so having an understanding of tourist and non-tourist groups, but also formal and informal sector workers. So that would be my only addition to what Sarah and Kate have said there. Thank you. Thanks,
Gemma. And I can see that Tite has commented that if all countries could disaggregate by the 8 variables in 1718 in the SDG target, that would already be a huge progress in identifying marginalized groups. And I think as statisticians, we're very aware that that's already very challenging. So there is a list. And I think that just to add, just because my past experience was at UNHCR, which is also working to disaggregate by for refugees and for stateless populations. And sometimes it could be challenging if it's solely based on national priorities, if countries don't see those populations as being a priority. So in this case, non-nationals. So that can also sometimes be a challenge. I'd like to just go to one, I think we've got time for one last question, and that's from our colleague here at ESCAP Statistics, Rike, who's asked an interesting question, and she's directed it at Sarah, but maybe any of the other panelists might want to give to chime in. And it's gender seems to be mostly translated into women once we see concrete examples. Can you give us some examples of men's issues to pay attention to in statistical work? So I know Sarah and Renice need to run, so maybe you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much, Petra and Enrique. I think this is a fabulous question, and we often run into this, like, you know, gender statistics are women's statistics, which is absolutely not the case, right? So gender statistics are just statistics to capture the realities in the lives of women and men, you know. So some examples, for instance, I mean, for like, there are many. For instance, we know child labor. More boys are engaged in child labor than girls, right? So that's an issue where men are at a disadvantage. We know homicides, for instance, many more men die from intentional homicide than women. So that's another issue where you know, it's a men's issue disproportionately. Tobacco use rates. Same story. You know, we see that this is mostly a men's issue compared to in many countries anyway. You know, the country where I'm from, that's not the case actually, but you know, in many countries. Even COVID-19, we have seen some differences in the rates of contagion and of death, right, between men and women, and we see that in some countries, men are dying disproportionately. So definitely, you know, gender statistics are about looking at the differences, not necessarily looking at women's issues only. I don't know if this responds to your question. Thank you.
Would any of the other panelists like to make a comment on that question? Okay, so I think that we don't have time for any more questions. Unfortunately, we will need to close. But this chat will remain active, I think, for another month. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to add them to this chat. And the panelists will be able to see them and to answer any questions that do come up. So I think that all that remains really is to say thank you very much to all the panelists for such excellent presentations. Thank you very much to Kenya for coming to contribute to an Asia Pacific focused webinar. We very much appreciate all the inputs and time that everyone has spent on this Stats Café. So thank you all very much for joining us today.